And welcome once again to Living in the 21st Century. Joining me today is Dr. Kfoury from River Educational Consulting. Doc, it's a pleasure to always have you on.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Errol.
Beautiful. I want to touch on a few things concerning domestic violence today, but one thing that really had me thinking recently was how international I call it craziness, can make things happen even locally. You know, the war between Israel and Palestine, or Hamas, which one of it is, had triggered an elderly person here recently this week to stab up a 6-year-old kid to death simply because he was a Muslim. And I am sure that he may not even be the only person who thinking that if you are a Muslim and you're messing with the Jews, this is what probably can happen. I say that simply because domestic violence can take on the shape and fashion from so much different dimensions. You can't even really think about it. You see the cases of rapes and kept hidden between husbands and wives, and violence is just crazy. How could we really create an atmosphere that can bring about more vision to signs and triggers of domestic violence, and they can get out there to the public or to the police or whatever?
So, Errol, you actually brought up a lot of great points and a lot of trauma and how it subdivides into our lives. Mm-hmm. So, as far as what is going on in the world today, there is a lot of fear, and fear causes anger and aggression at times because people just don't know, right?
Yes.
And so in relations to the elderly individual who harmed the younger individual, the child, there is a huge amount of fear of safety. And so it's the basic animal instinct thought of kill or be killed. And so there is a lot of fear among both the Jewish community and the Muslim communities, where their safety is continuously at question. And it doesn't matter if they're across the ocean in the United States, where it's supposed to be safe from the conflict. It actually exists here as well, in addition to all around the world. So we're not the only country that is seeing a spike in aggression between the two cultures and religions. But the best we can do is just try to keep our mindset and really recognize that each individual isn't a threat. We have to make sure we assess each and every situation. As far as the marital rape, for example, behind closed doors, that we are now slowly finding out, and the numbers slowly finding out that are emerging. A lot of individuals were told, and there still is the old school of thought that part of a womanly job or part of a husbandly job is to satisfy your partner sexually, not only spiritually and morally and however, family life, but it's also sexually. And sometimes the individual who is experiencing rape feels like, but he's my husband, so the police won't charge him. Or she's my wife, sorry, they won't charge. Or even same-sex marriage is same thing. How can you live with a person, and how can you be married to a person and they engage in that behavior, instead of thinking that it doesn't matter, it's an individual saying no, and this is my boundary. This is the other person taking advantage of that and disregarding the safety and the needs of that individual. But in actuality, that is rape. A lot of reporting doesn't happen because the individuals talk to each other and talk to themselves, and the spouses might just say, or their relationships might just say, well, nobody's going to believe you because we're dating or we're married. So it's what nobody's going to believe you. The police aren't going to believe you, etc. Or it could be even more that the individual who is raping the other individual the trauma that sets in is not only just physical, but it's emotional, it's mental, it could even be financial. The spouse that's aggressive could be saying, well, I'm going to cut you off from everything. If you go and tell somebody, I'm going to cut you off. Or it might be mental, where the individual is saying that you are my wife and nobody's going to believe you and you're not worth anything. And if you leave, nobody's going to want you. You're damaged goods. You're broken. I mean, it is a very typical situation that you see in domestic violence. And this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So this is a pretty pertinent topic. And it doesn't matter if it's man on woman or woman on man or man on man and woman on woman. It is occurring. And one of the things you and I talked off screen about was whether or not it's being increasingly reporting, or is it increasing that it's occurring? And I think it's actually a little of both. I think there is enough evidence that's coming out post-COVID and post-identification of same-sex marriages or same-sex relationships are actually increasing in the reporting, because they are. I believe it's a result of cultures becoming more accepting in the United States, so that they don't feel, if they are in a relationship that's abusive or they're in a relationship that there's forced sex, they feel more comfortable, the individual feels more comfortable to go to the authorities, because they're not going to be judged based on their sexual orientation or identification. So I do believe that there is an increase in awareness, but there's also an increase in reporting, because there might be an increase in same-sex relations rape happening, or it could just be the correlation of a lot more individuals are more comfortable coming out and talking about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you think then there should be some form of preventative marital advice before people get married? Just because there are those who are under the concept that when you are married, you become one. This is the spiritual belief, and this is how the Word of God have it, that when you become one, when you become married, you become one. Right. The woman should be submissive to the husband. The husband should also treat the woman as equal, his equal, and that's how it is written in the Word of God. Do you think men, and I don't want to just point at men in this case, but I can say men for some reason, because men are mostly the aggressive one with testosterone and he want to do his thing. Do you think men think when they are married that they themselves own the woman, and what he says go, if he wants sex 1,000,000 times, he must have it, she can't refuse? Should it be some form of understanding that, look, I'm human, my mind may not be always to this or something? Could you unravish that, this awareness that being married doesn't always give you the right to think you own the person, or you should have when she said no, or vice versa?
Again, it's a really great question that's multi-layered for sure. I think previous generations and the current generations that are raising young men and women should start with the respect of each other's bodies and each individual body, right? So when you're teaching them as a child that you're not allowed to just randomly touch somebody, which is why schools are very strict now on do not hit another person, do not touch somebody else's butt, do not pants them, all those tricks that when we were growing up, it was a common occurrence, right, in the hallways and in classrooms and whatnot. And so I think one is we really do, and if we do the traditional route with a man and a woman, the traditional cultural route is, or community route, is we do need to teach our men that when you become one, and we teach the women the same thing, when we become one, each individual still exists on their own, and their wants and their needs are, it is their responsibility to communicate that and understand what their partner needs. So whether or not it is a traditional male-female or male-male or female-female, all parties responsible are, it's important for them to be able to communicate the rules and regulations of what they see for their relationship. And that means sexual identity, and that means sexual responsibility and sexual actions. believing that you own another person is not acceptable at this point anymore. To believe that you are one and only you and this other person are in this relationship is something that both of you need to agree on and need to understand. But each individual still has their human rights, their civil rights, and their right to say no. And so that needs to be clearly communicated at the beginning of a relationship and throughout that relationship. So when you marry, even females today, I've heard young brides in their early 20s say that, sometimes they engage in activity that they didn't want to because one of the individuals, for example, they're married to a veteran who is going off on duty. So she didn't feel like it, but she convinced herself to do that, right? And there is that thought in marital counseling that, to try to connect and become one. And so she put those two thoughts together, like, this is what I should be doing as a wife. This is what I should be doing to enhance my marital my marital relationship. But she just didn't feel like doing it in the moment that she was there. So she had to say no. And it didn't, for her, it was lucky that she had a partner who just understood that. But a lot of times they don't. And sometimes they engage in behavior. Women will engage in behavior, especially with men who are larger, who are more aggressive, who are, continuing. And that leads us to the situation we're talking about today, where they didn't feel completely comfortable. They didn't want to have a certain action in the sex, or they just wanted to have a basic kind of sex when their partner wanted a little bit more risky of a sexual maneuver. And so it feels like it was against their will. And then they're left with resentment and feelings of not feeling good enough. And it could even exacerbate to become a conversation afterwards. And the partner who took advantage might convince the other partner who's expressing their concerns that there's something wrong with them and that they're not good enough. And why can't they just be more risky like so-and-so? Or nobody's going to believe you and you should just be lucky that I'm with you. And then it spirals into a whole bunch of different kinds of abuse.
Okay. You mentioned earlier that schools don't prohibit kids from touching each other or pinching each other and so forth. Is that some form of mental, psychological, emotional restraint that can trigger, let's say, for example, a boy has, I don't want to use the boy all the time, or a girl has a crush on a boy, she really loved this guy at school. She wanted to give him a little kiss or a little pinch or a little tap on the butt or something to get his attention. And it happens. We are humanity. And I think there are some things that if you strip humanity of, that is a part of their day-to-day living, is what makes us operate as one people or human beings, to love and be attractive to each other. We try to take away those things simply to avoid sexual harassment, whether it's school or the workplace. Could this have some mental fatigue that may evolve in some other form of violence?
I think when it's consensual between two individuals, I think it does not impede any kind of behavioral abnormalities. In other words, I think it's okay when they're two individuals that are joking with each other. They feel comfortable enough pinching each other or tickling, or I think the overall part that where it becomes dangerous is when, and you see it in movies or you'll see it in television shows, where a sports jock will run down the hallway and slap people on the butt, whether it's a boy or a girl, and that can be construed as inappropriate. And sometimes the slapping of another same gender could lead to a little bit more hazing, and that is violent, right? That can always lead to uncomfortable situations and violent situations. And then also too, if there's no boundary for an individual, whether male or female, they are more likely, if they don't understand what's socially acceptable, what's culturally acceptable, what is, physically acceptable, they have a higher risk of becoming violent in the dating world or in the marital world as well. And then if they don't have a physical sense of what's appropriate and what's not, and don't have social cues, then they can become aggressive in a bar situation if their partner is talking to another individual of the same sex or other sex or however it is, and they feel that they need to step in, and that could lead to a violent interaction.
Yeah, I want to look at this part also because I can remember vividly, probably like 7-8 years ago, we had Kfoury, who's our Chief Justice, not Chief Justice, one of our justices, when he was about to take the oath, there was this lady who came forward and said he had sexually harassed her and so forth. And it's a situation where she would have lived her life. She grew up, she got married, that was thrown behind her. He would have went through different phases of his life in different positions. She never spoke out about it, but when he came to this point where he was to sit at the pinnacle of his career, she tried to strip him down. Now, I'm saying that to say this because we look at violence from a short-term standpoint. We want to look at the long-term effects of how a person, in most cases, it was the women this time more than men who came forward like decades after and said they were sexually harassed and molested by particular people like Bill Cosby, and the list goes on. And then it had a negative effect in the end for those persons or perpetrators or whoever you want to call them. Now, I say that to say this. And this may be a little bit, I don't want to say unconstitutional or constitutional in this case, but should it be that in this 21st century that if a person feel that they were sexually harassed or be a victim of some violence, despite of whatever people may say, to come forward and say in the early, get it over with, than waiting alone to cause, to bring up a person, because in some areas of your life, if a person think that, well, I did this so many years ago, you want to bring me down, it may result in that person losing their life or violence, outbursts of violence, or worse, blowing someplace up. Because when guys reach the pinnacle of their lives, for a female to pull them down, I mean, even if you go back with Trump years, it's only he was just running for president, so he had to stay humble. But in other cases where a person may not have anything to lose, and this may cause an outburst of violence, what would you want to say to, whether it's female, male, or same sex, or whatever, if they feel that they're unjustifiably molested, that should they just deal with it in early?
So my recommendation always is to, if they are able to process it and they know that it's not the correct thing. So we're a whole different subject when it happens when they're in their early stages of life, right? Mm-hmm. Where they don't know who to talk to, or they might even have been told if you say anything, and there might be a threat by the abuser, right, or the perpetrator. So we're talking about the individuals who would be the adult stages, whether it's high school or beyond, high school, college or beyond. I believe the earliest you can report it would be the best case scenario. I think a lot of high school children, for example, experience behavior that does not make them feel comfortable, yet they don't always go to their guidance counselor, their school adjustment counselors, or a teacher that they trust, which is what we need to remind men and women that they need to do. As soon as it happens, that way a plan can be put in place and hopefully protection can be provided for them so it doesn't escalate to a violent situation like a rape that Judge Kavanaugh was accused of. And I think waiting around for it. Now, again, you will hear across the board, especially for women, and I don't mean any concern for men, but not that I'm not concerned about men, but women have said repeatedly, and I've even experienced in the court system, is very pro-male. So going through all of all of the testifying, the having to be cross-examined, it's a lot, and it's mentally and emotionally exhausting. So it's almost re-traumatizing the victim who has already experienced the trauma. So many will keep to themselves and not report because they're not only afraid of what the court system is going to do, what the opposing attorney will say, but also what society will say about them once they take on their attacker. And so we have to make that system in court a little bit easier and more gentle and supportive for whoever the victim is, male or female, transgender even, and we have to make that comfortable for them to be able to come forward as soon as possible to report it and to have a set plan in place to support them after they have reported it as well. And I think that will eliminate a lot of post-trauma in addition to that's I forgot to shut off my phone. That will also, prevent possible suicidal risk, which is large among women and men that have experienced intense trauma like rape or like domestic violence, that are continuously thinking that it's easier and less painful to end their lives.
Okay. In terms now of, I don't have to call it technological domestic violence, because we find that recently it doesn't matter what social media companies, what preventative measures they use, they still can't stop the bullying and harassing on social media. And it's leading to a lot of suicides. What word of encouragement would you give to a person to maintain their strength, avoid getting in certain conditions where they may be a victim to social media, keeping their privacy to themselves? Is there any caution words?
So that's where I actually struggle, and I'm going to be very honest with you, Errol. Like, it is very hard to. I feel like the victim often has to change their pattern of behavior while the perpetrator just doesn't. So they're expected and they're suggested, and again, by no means of society in and of itself, but they're expected to not post anything. They're expected to not move on with their lives and show that they're happy, because they should be miserable if this really happened. They should continuously, for the months and the weeks and the times after, should not have any light in their life and should not have any joy. It should just be so consuming, so that they shouldn't be posting pictures of their children or their loved ones or whatever. And so my advice, though, I really do. And again, like I said, I have experienced this myself. So I have eliminated a bit of social media as well, and you are very particular in who you have in your network, and you could choose to eliminate as much as you possibly can and close it down to a very specific group of people that you'd like to share your stuff with, and that can be done in the security settings. And then I think, following a traumatic event, I think staying offline, but instead going into support groups, in-person support groups, which you can find all over any place in a city or on online, a link that could show you where to meet up. I think in person would actually give you a sense of, okay, I'm not the only one. And that grounds you into a community, which makes you less isolated, which then could lead to a more fortified protective risk values instead of isolation, which then can cause you to have more destructive behavior, I guess.
Okay. In terms of and this may be the last question. In terms of young people or young students at school, they're all running crazy in their minds and somewhat innocent to the dark environment that is prepared for them. Can you speak to those minds just to tell them, just to give a sense of cautiousness to what they get involved with and how they conduct themselves to avoid any kind of violent harm coming their way?
I think the basic part of all of that is to have a sense of, if it doesn't feel right in your gut, that's not a good thing. If it's not what you would have wanted to be treated like, it's not a good thing. If it makes you uncomfortable or makes you feel bad about yourself, it's not a good thing. I think those are the barometers. And what can you do for it? I think, again, utilize the staff support at the school to help you figure out whether or not those flags that feel uncomfortable are in true fashion what we call red flags of behavior that could lead to more destructive behavior later on in life. So I would say, again, as soon as you feel something off or not comfortable, address it immediately. And if you don't feel comfortable just addressing it by yourself, seek out an adult support system, which I hope they would have at least one safe individual in their schools, at least one, so that they can talk to that person, whether it's a teacher, a maintenance guy, a cafeteria woman, or a guidance counselor or principal.
Okay, well, on that note, Dr. Tara Kfoury, it was really a pleasure having you on. That half hour flew by pretty quickly.
Yes.
But obviously, this is not our last meeting. To all those who will be tuning in or living in the 21st century, have an enjoyable day.